Well, kids, welcome to the next episode of the Sunday Extra podcast. Before we get too far along, last week's topic was on failure. And as it turns out, there was a level of our discussion that was a total fail. I mentioned that Pastor Matt, you were not with us last week because you were in North Carolina. And as it turns out, that's not at all where he was.
Yes.
Where were you?
Yeah, so let me just set this up. I finally get home. I was supposed to come home Wednesday evening, and I finally make it home Thursday evening.
Because it rained like Noah rain here.
And flight gets canceled, and
Thankfully, there's an ark over there somewhere.
Yes.
So that's good.
Well, I wasn't close enough to get to it, though.
Okay.
But so I'm actually,
I can't spit my coffee out on the microphone.
on my way home from the airport, I tune in and I see, there's another edition of Sunday Extra Podcast. I want to see what these guys actually did, and I'm just cracking up while I'm driving. To be completely fair, we talk about how people do what makes sense to them, and like there are reasonable things. Like I totally see how Brian got that I was, in North Carolina, but that's not at all where I was. So just really quick, we want to live an honest and open life here. So let's just set the record straight in all honesty. So I was in Florida, flew in and out of Fort Lauderdale. I was specifically in Boca Raton. And that's where this pastor's coaching group met this round.
So that part was right.
That part was yes. I was in Florida. I was in Florida,
the East Coast.
I was on the East Coast. Okay, so we're in the zone.
In the ballpark, yeah.
But then
you're not at a surfing competition.
What happened was I get to the meeting on Wednesday morning, and I get one of those unfortunate texts from the airline, and it says, your flight's been canceled. And I really had a couple of meetings on Thursday that I was really trying to be home for, which is why I was flying home Wednesday night. I normally stay over and fly back Thursday so I can just have some time to, decompress and work through all the stuff we talk about for 2 days. So I get on my phone really quick, and the airlines, they'll reschedule you eventually, but if you want to be proactive and choose your flights, you can do that. So I look and I see, okay, well, I can fly about the same time leaving that evening. I can fly from Fort Lauderdale to Charlotte, and
which
then
is in North Carolina.
Yes, and then fly from Charlotte back to DFW.
That's weird.
And instead of getting home at 9:30 p.m., I was going to be arriving sometime after midnight. But that still gets me home for my Thursday meetings. And so that's what I do. I change my flight. I even, because I did it quick and early, I got good seats on those flights. And then I finish my day of meetings, and I drive to the airport, and I'm there. And then I'm watching, as I'm sure the weather's developing here and moving east, I'm watching the time of my flight to Charlotte being delayed. And being delayed.
15-minute delay, or is it like hours?
It's different increments. So I started out, I was going to have an hour between arriving in Charlotte and departing, which is not bad. An hour is pretty good. Then it jumped to 9 minutes. And I thought, oh no, that's, but then I looked, and the gates were almost right next to each other. So that's even possible, right? And then the next jump, the flight, it's still delayed, and we don't have a firm departure time, but now the arrival time is going to be after the departure. Oh, so it's, by this time it's like approaching 5:30, 6 p.m. in Fort Lauderdale, and I'm like, I can either just stay here another night in a place that I know the area relatively well, or I can possibly maybe arrive at some unknown time in Charlotte and then have to stay the night there in a place that I don't know. I've only been through the airport there a couple times, so I'm like, I'll stick with Fort Lauderdale. And so spent the night, and then by that time, as I changed the flight again, now I can't get a flight home until like 4:45 p.m. the next day. So
not a.m.
Correction. So instead of being in meetings all day Thursday, I mean, I actually sat in a hotel room, got a late checkout, and then sat at the airport and got some work done. But I will say, like, the highlight of this experience, which I don't know if I even told you guys this, I'm sitting there at the airport waiting now for the flight that everything's all systems go, and I see one of those like F-22 Raptors fly over the runway and do like one of those high G, like where they like almost like do this U-turn turn right in front of me, and I'm like sitting there like eating at this window just looking out at the runway and everything, and I was like, whoa, and because I couldn't get my phone up, and so I had my phone out, and then a second one does it. And then I think they did the same thing at the other end of the runway, and they landed. So I got a couple pictures of the second one. I got a picture of them landing. Apparently, there was an air show that was going to be happening that weekend, so they must have been doing some trials or something. Yeah. So that was fun to get to see.
And you desire that for your younger self, was to be that kind of pilot.
Yeah. There was a time when young Matt, I actually tried to get you have to get like a congressional nomination, but I wanted to go to the Naval Academy and fly Tomcats off of carriers.
Yeah, come on.
Yeah, that shows you my age.
Yeah.
Those things have been retired for a long time now, but that was at that time would have been the dream. And then God said no.
Yeah,
I was going to be Maverick. Yeah,
you and the rest of America after Top Gun.
That's right. But and actually, so. This is all history giving, right? So I didn't get the congressional nomination to the Naval Academy. I did get a congressional nomination to the Merchant Marine Academy, which I'm like, I don't even know exactly what the Merchant Marine is. And of course, I looked at it and figured it out, but then I was like, I don't think that's what I want to do with my life. So I turned that one down. But anyway, so, and if all of my plans as a young high school Matt had gone according to my plans, none of us would be sitting here right now doing this, because this wouldn't have been the path I was on.
You'd be flying over the Pacific.
Yeah. And who knows what today.
If you had gone to the Merchant Marines, could you walk around and just say, I was in the Marines?
Yeah, what exactly is the Merchant Marines?
I don't know.
Because I know what merchants are, and I know what Marines are.
I think it has something to do with, like, the people that, like, I don't know what the term is, captain or drive a lot of the, like, tanker ships and, like, merchant ships. Like, if you're going to be...
I'm guessing it's like Coast Guard.
You're going to be in charge of something, yes, but it wasn't a military or paramilitary type branch, but it was more in the civilian thing, I guess. But there was an academy. I don't even know enough of it. I just knew I was like, that's not what I want to do.
Right.
I want to land on the top of a ship.
There's no fighter jets. I don't want to do that.
Right.
If I can't buzz the tower, I don't want to do it.
Wow.
So there you go. So I did go to Florida, and the quick texting that Brian and I had, because we were actually supposed to be in a meeting that morning together. That was one of the meetings, and so
all I remember is the NC state abbreviation.
Yes.
Like, oh, it must be North Carolina.
Yeah. So anyway, but I enjoyed listening to the rest of your failures.
Great.
As I had just experienced a fail coming, wasn't able to get home on time. That was good. You guys did a good job. So
yay!
Keep up the good work.
Well, while we're in the spirit of getting to know one another, Sunday we honored the volunteers and servants at our church, and it sort of raised a question. I ended up sitting in with a group on Sunday morning where that was, I think, in talking with the leader of that group, it just happened to also be talking about where might somebody volunteer or serve at the church. Like, well, what an auspicious accident that this all, it was not really an accident, put it together. So we had the party after church and whatnot. Mm-hmm. I guess in all of that, you can kind of start waxing nostalgic of how did I get started in serving, because it didn't start with, I shall be called to pastor or associate pastor. Does anyone call to associate pastor? Anyway, but to serve at a church at a vocational level, that's not usually where that starts. It usually starts somewhere else. So my question for y'all is, whether it was at Hope or somewhere else, what was that first, like when you think back, this is really where I caught the understanding of what serving at the church is. What did you do? How did you get involved in that? Go.
So I grew up at Hope, and so I got to serve as a high school student, middle school student. Then I went to college out of state, and then I came back, and the best advice that I got coming back was like, you think you know a lot, because like, when you graduate college, you think you know a lot of things, but it was a 3-part phrase. It was show up, shut up, and serve. And that was actually really helpful for me, because I thought I knew a lot, but it was like, one of the best things I can do is just, instead of me like having this like attitude of, I served as like as a leader in my college ministry, is like, I still have a lot to learn. And so that was actually really helpful for me. So I came, and taking that advice, I just said, where can I help? Like that was the first question I asked. Like, what can I do to help? Was kind of the attitude I had. And so I started serving on the town hall team. And then also started serving in Sunshine Factory, which is our preschool ministry. So I was doing both kind of at the same time, because that's where the need was. And so, that was kind of how I got my chops of serving. But I think from that, like, I was serving on the town hall team, and my leader there knew I liked to sing and like to do worship, and they're like, we actually have a need for that. And so that was how I ended up serving in the worship team after that, was from just entering on a place where it was needed, and then the leader helped guide me to something that I was interested in, and there actually was a further need for. So
very cool.
What about you, Jeremy?
I'm gonna go to Hope. When I first started at Hope, so when I first came to Hope, I had been at another church with a couple of other people. One of them was the Sherwoods, Phil Sherwood. So Phil had been coming to Hope for a little while. Me and my wife came to Hope, and I'd been coming for a couple months. Seems like maybe a little bit longer, not too long. At that time, there was no like volunteer to really get you plugged in. There was no start here, and so there's really no on-ramp necessarily to plug into serving. And Phil just asked me, he's like, hey, I'm working in the Energy Zone boys. Do you want to come help in the Energy Zone boys with me? And I was like, okay. So that's how I got plugged in. I quickly realized I'm not called or wired for Energy Zone age boys, but it was a good experience. And, I did it for a year, completed the year. And then I think moved to hospitality, maybe like name tags, ended up not long after that, like leading some of the hospitality teams. But that's how I first got plugged in, was just a friend inviting me, saying, I know you guys are looking for like that real funny, like overseas story, but a friend,
we're always looking for that.
I got abducted by aliens, and they wanted
there
us.
was no boat and waves and an island.
There was no alley.
Right. No AK-47
strapped down to a laser table.
Right.
You will now serve.
But it was just a friend who knew me, invited me to help serve where he was serving, and jumped in and did it. And and I kind of jokingly, kind of not say, this is not my wiring, but it was a great experience. It was a positive experience. And so, that's how I first got into serving here at Hope.
For me, I always jump back to the church I grew up in. There is a Hope story too, that is sort of also an origin story, because there was a stop in there. But the way our sanctuary was set up growing up, it was like a very small room, and then in the very back, behind a wall with a little hole in the wall so that the sound guy could hear what was coming, there was this guy named Rudy Bradburn who would sit back there and tweak these little knobs. And for reasons that still mystify me, I walked back there in between services and just started showing an interest in, like, what are you doing back here? And he said that he had the ability with that soundboard to make the pastor sound like Donald Duck. I thought, really? he never did it. And I have enough experiences with soundboards that no, you can't actually make somebody sound. But that was fascinating. So I started as.
So we lied to you.
I'm certain we could make him sound interesting. I don't know about Daffy Duck or Donald.
Auto-tune?
Auto-tune was not a thing in 1980, whatever. So in junior high, I was back there helping him run sound, and eventually, this was back in the day when somebody would sing a song, and we didn't have a band. We had a pianist and maybe an organist, and maybe
pipe organ or just organ.
I'm sure it sounded like a pipe organ, but it was an electric organ. Okay. There were no pipes, and if somebody was going to sing a song like whatever, this is in the days of Sandy Patty and all of that, they would have to go to the Christian bookstore and buy a cassette. You have to learn how to cue all that up and put it in the thing. And when they said, here's my intro for the song, and then they point at you like, click, and you had to get that going. And hope
there's another 5 to 12 second
Well,
delay.
not if you cue it up right. Then there's,
Oh, yes.
But then
my mistake.
My favorite was the gal who every time she sang, she picked a song so meaningful to her that she cried. And the song just keeps going. And eventually she has to catch up with where in all of that silence is the song now. But anyway, so that kind of led into serving, but I never thought of it of I'm ministering or I'm helping. I'm kind of doing a thing that's fun for me to do. And that kind of was a driver for a lot of things. And that sort of transferred over into college, and I sort of would do skits or write a skit for a church or that kind of stuff. But the thing that I noticed by the time I got to Hope, I think from that first experience, I started to notice how the service was supposed to go. Mm-hmm. And then if I wasn't serving, I would sit in the pew and get stressed out because this isn't happening at
this is how it's supposed to
the
go.
cues aren't happening at the right time or whatever. Or I'd end up at some other conference or some other church and just start noticing how the production of all of the elements are supposed to go together. And different things happened during my time at seminary. They're like, I don't want to, whatever I'm going to do, it's not that. And I mostly came to Hope, kind of burn out on the helping part, and was just happy to coast and bake and just not do anything. Glenda was not. She was ready to go from the moment we walked in. I think the first place I really served was in Energy Zone, but that was not either. That was also not my cup of tea. And so I think there was one Sunday that whoever was working in the AV booth, either somebody got sick and somebody didn't show up, or there was a depletion of people. And John Holliday looked at me and was like, hey, can you come in? All we need you to do is press a button to move the PowerPoint forward. I'm like, yes, I can press buttons. So I pressed the buttons, and then like, hey, you did pretty good. And so then I end up back there.
You're like, this is my magic finger.
Exactly where I didn't want to be. And from that, I ended up, this will really date me, we had a booth for the longest time of duplicating the sermon onto cassettes and CDs and setting all that up. So I started serving there more regularly, and then back to the booth. And then things happened where I ended up serving and leading teams and then on staff. And I think God has done a lot of work on I still cannot now sit in another church and not wonder how are all the pieces going together and why are you doing it this way and all of that. But there is a level of enjoying how it goes together while also enjoying the experience simultaneously. So God has helped me kind of reconcile that part of it. But that's sort of how I got.
Yeah, I think for me, I grew up in church as well. And it was, I don't know, like, if you go back so far in time and you say it's like more traditional style, right? Mm-hmm. Well, I guess
I still want to know when our style becomes traditional.
Exactly.
When do we start saying, yeah.
But, so we, as a kid, we just went to kids ministry. Even as a student, there was not like a vision for participating. It was kind of, you just show up, right? And that was actually one of the things when I was in college. I was still going to the church that my family went to because my college was, within an hour's distance, and I started to feel like there's got to be more to this, and the sermons were great, but it was just like there's got to be more to this. So that's when I got invited to go to Pier Point, which is a church in our network. This was before we had a network, though, and it was a small church start that was like, I don't know, 12 months old, so meeting in this temporary location, which actually recently, last couple of years I drove by, that building is no longer there. It's a park.
Wow.
It's like a spot of grass. It was dingy senior center.
Yeah.
So it didn't feel like church.
I remember you driving it by when it was still up.
Yeah. And I think my perspective on church was it was the building, not the people, So it was there at Pier Point, and the thing with a church plant is like it needs to be all hands on deck. And it's even like church is over, and like here at Hope we say, hey, have a great week, we'll see you next week. And then people can get up and they can, go and do whatever they want to do. You say that in a small church plant that's got to be out of there in, 30 minutes. And it's like, hey, have a great week. And on your way out, take your chair and stack it, So it's kind of like forced serving.
Yeah.
But everybody's serving.
Yeah, it's like a good opportunity.
And then I started to learn about the hard attitudes and participating in the ministry and realizing, there's all kinds of things. I mean, there's more that needs to be done than just picking up the chair. That's just sort of everybody does that. So you'll like this, Brian. My first place to serve was, what we would call is like the booth here. Mm-hmm. But it was more this like, I don't know, 18-inch by 18-inch rolling cart that like you take the top off of it, and there was this mini mixer on there. Uh-huh. And then there was this, big long cable that you drug around the corner of the room, and all the microphones got plugged into it, and it was this self-contained unit. And so, fortunately, there was somebody else that it was better with sound that could like, get it all queued up like during the band rehearsal. But then my job was more just turning on and off the microphone. So that was kind of like my first real serving position. But then what that did was, we talk about how we want people to serve where they're needed and where they're gifted. Mm-hmm. And, there's just a lot of needs. Like, this may not be my favorite thing, but hey, I can help out here. But then I started learning more about like, there's actually other ways to serve the church. There's things that happen on Sunday, there's things that don't happen on Sunday. And that kind of, as the pastor of the church was mentoring me, then I started to realize, like, there's actually some projects that I could help him with, even though I'm a college student. He's much more visionary, not organizational, and that's a little more in my gifting. And so we talk about some things, and then I got to like mutually. He's helping me grow as a follower of Jesus, and then I'm able to help him. Like, hey, what if we organize these things like this, or or did some marketing things, because that's what my undergraduate degree was in. So then it just started to snowball from there. Of like, wow, what else can I do to help God's people and God's kingdom expand? I mean, until I was probably like 19 years old or so, I didn't even like doing something in church, like other than showing up. Like it never occurred to me. And I don't think we talked about it either. But yeah, so that's my first serve and my journey there.
Well, that's interesting, because I think the terms we use for all of those things also come with so much baggage. So like ministry, it wasn't until someone pointed out to me that the leader of Great Britain is the prime minister. So that's different. They're not a church worker, they're government. So what does minister mean? And it comes down to, it just means help, just be a help. So the prime minister is the first helper, but then like you mentioned in the sermon, to be called a servant in our culture is a slap in the face. It's not a positive. Or to volunteer is sort of in the ballpark of, if I have time. but but then you have church. So what is church? It's the people, not the building, and all that. So there's all these terms that just we have that if you're coming in, you have to get through a bunch of definitions of stuff to get down to. Oh, it means essentially it's like around the house. If something's on the floor, I can minister to my family by picking the thing up or putting the dishes away or whatever. Like, how can I help the whole group be a success in what's going on? Which I think leads to some of the things that Matt, you mentioned in the sermon of, the difference of what I think serving is versus what Jesus thinks serving is. And you said that the path to greatness starts with serving. So, kind of if you want to dig into that a little bit more, or how have you guys seen either part of your spiritual growth come out of the serving aspect? As I know none of us at our table are going to we're great because we're serving, but there is a level of spiritual growth in that. So how has that worked?
Yeah, I think, I chose not to go this route, but I really wanted to just even connect it back to what we looked at last fall with Life God's Way, and this whole upside down kingdom mentality that God created this world and everything was perfect and right side up, and then our sin and rebellion, turned that upside down. So we got the world hanging upside down, and then this comes from Acts, and it's like, hey, there's the men that are turning the world upside down. Well, they're taking a upside down world and turning it upside down, which is right side up. So everything is just it's backwards. Like the way that the world works is upside down from the way God has things. So that's the perfect explanation of why in the world people see serving as lowly, and you don't want to do that, but in the kingdom of God, that's the greatest people are the ones that serve. And then even Jesus himself, the greatest ever, he comes and he serves, and not only serves but dies for us. Talk about the ultimate act of sacrificial serving and love. So we think of greatness as, somebody did something amazing, somebody broke, set records, broke records, is the strongest, is the fastest, is the, whatever, particularly in the sports. And there's an element of I said it's not wrong that, we're like, wow, that was a amazing achievement. I took my daughter to the gymnastics, the NCAA gymnastics finals that was at the Dickies Arena back last month, and there was a girl who her final score wasn't 10, but at the collegiate level there's 8 or 10 judges, and they're all looking and judging, and then they take an average of their score to get their score. But this girl on this floor routine did this amazing routine, and I saw, I've never seen this before, one of the judges, their little thing that they hold up, they did a 10. So in their mind, this was perfect, this was flawless, it was 10. And I think they said you have to get at least 3 10s for your score to be a 10. So in that case, not 2 others didn't think it was that, but sure. So we're look, that was amazing, that was great, and it's not wrong, but there's just so much more to it. And we think well, if I want to be great, then I have to go do all these things. But when we try to look at God's definition and what he wants, and it's no, you actually lower yourself and humble yourself, and he sees that. So so anyway, I wanted to make that connection. It really goes back to everything we talked about last fall, and just how the world that we experience because of its brokenness is actually upside down from God's ways. And as God's people, we are called to live God's ways. So anytime we feel we're swimming against the stream, we're going against something, it's because we are. Yeah. It's one, it doesn't feel natural to us because of our sin nature, but then as Jesus changes us and we're now living for him, we do things that we wouldn't naturally do. So it's just it's even an internal battle that we can have to deal with, to say, no, I am going to live my life for Jesus and live in his ways, and that's just very different.
Yeah, I think as I think through growing, especially with serving, okay, Gen X reference here.
Let's
here we
go.
go. Yeah, I think we want to be like Mario, and we want to hit the mushroom and go from little Mario to big Mario, just overnight. But that doesn't happen. But especially with serving, serving is being faithful and helping where we can. And like Matt said, Jesus valued serving and set the example of serving. But we don't just like serve one Sunday. Oh, I'm 2 inches taller spiritually now because I serve. It's over a lifetime of being faithful that we can look back and see, I have been growing. So I think it's tricky to say, how have you seen yourself grow through serving? Because, I don't see it until I look back over years of being faithful. And it's like, oh, okay, I can see now God has been growing me. And I think that's not just serving, that's in a lot of aspects of our spiritual growth. We're always looking for that mushroom, but as far as I know, there is no magic mushroom for spiritual growth.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I remember hearing some imagery that somebody used once. This is just like a lot of things in life. Because of the world we live in, we are so accustomed to like fast food and microwaves, right? So like, well, I can just go through the drive-thru and get that, like I'm hungry and I can get a whole meal in like less than 5 minutes, right? But life and growing, especially in the kingdom of God, growing spiritually, it's more like a garden. Like you have to plant the seeds, you have to water, you have to weed, you have to, actually cultivate this, and then you see, something small, like a small seed, begin to sprout, and then it begins to grow, and then it's starting to bear fruit, and then you can actually take it and eat it. Well, man, we don't have that kind of time, right? I mean, if I want fruits or vegetables, I'm just going to go to the grocery store and buy them. They're already ready to go. That's not quite as fast as fast food, because it's the raw materials. And then, it always gets me, you read, like, especially in the Old Testament, there's times where, like, a guest will come, and it's like, hey, sit down, let's make a meal. What do they got to do?
Right.
They got to go out to the field. They got to find the cow or the goat or whatever they're gonna cook up. They got to find it. They got to kill it. They got to prepare it. They got to cook it. You're gonna have bread. I mean, you and I went to Guatemala, and we were starving when we got there. They're like, yeah, we're gonna cook you lunch, and it was like 3 hours later.
Yep.
And they actually took the corn, and they had to like break it down, and then they made the
they're like stone grinding the corn.
They're grinding the corn. They're making the dough, and they're making the tortillas, and they went out and killed some of the chickens,
or in one case the only chicken in the village.
And then it's like, wow, that took forever, but there was no drive-through and deep in the jungle where we were.
Right. But they did serve us coffee as we waited.
Hey,
some of the nastiest instant coffee.
Man, I was grateful.
You're grateful
for the coffee, but yes,
with a ton of sugar.
Ooh.
Always.
I did appreciate your unofficial favorite team reference.
Oh, yes.
I think one thing I've seen is just like God grows. I think when you talked about just like God grows us over time, like I think the Gospel of Luke 16:10, it says like whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And so but usually that starts with being faithful with a little in serving. And I can just think of times where like I was actually serving on Brian's team before I joined staff, and he asked me to do something at a time of just that seemed kind of small, and it was like an additional to what I was doing. I was like, this will take more time, but I'm going to go for it. And that actually really helped me later for my time on staff, like how just serving in that capacity, even though I didn't feel like it was something that was like I was really good at, but I just went for it. And it was a sacrifice to do it. But then I look later like, oh, God really used that to grow me in an area that I didn't think I would need, but God just sees a bigger picture. And so I think when we choose to sacrifice and serve, like, God does grow us, and also he grows our skills, he grows our character, he grows our knowledge over time. But again, it starts with that choice of, am I going to be willing to trust God and sacrifice and go for it? Yeah, that's kind of what stands out on that. The path to greatness starts with the decision to serve.
And real quick, I want to back up. It sounded like I was really ungrateful for the coffee that I was served in Guatemala in the jungles. I was very, very grateful. It was not my preferred coffee and preferred method of drinking coffee, but I was very thankful.
There wasn't like a
for
foamer for your frothy milk?
No.
Okay.
No. I don't froth.
Don't froth milk.
I don't froth, bro.
I'm trying to imagine a frother out there in the wilds of Guatemala. It's kind of hilarious. I think the thing that I've wrestled with the most is the thing that, I think we're always wrestling with is the mixed motives of, I think the one that I'm always combating is between, I know I should, but I don't want to, do I want to show up at the church earlier, or do I want to go do this? Like, all this kind of stuff is kind of I don't know if it's necessarily impeding on the me time, but it's just like, I've got other stuff I would rather do. And I think that a common thing that God has shown over time of serving is you didn't want to do it, but aren't you grateful that you did? And I had a friend years ago, I was asking them about, do you want to take on this particular opportunity? And the reply was, I know I will want to have done this, but I have no desire to do it. But because I want to have done it, I will say yes. And I think that is more likely been more of when I have stepped in and said yes, is I know I will appreciate the result of it, though I don't want to do it right now. And God has used even that pitiful reason to step up and serve to change my, like you were saying, to change my attitude or put me in relationship with different people I wouldn't have run into otherwise, or I've grown a skill, or I've honed a gift, or whatever those things are. But initially there is that desire realm of, that I'm really having to wrestle with. And so there's character that I think God is usually dealing with me on when it comes to serving.
Yeah, I think maybe part of it, when you're talking about the motivation, is sometimes we see it as a chore, right? Mm-hmm. We see it like, is this actually doing anything? But if you stop for a minute and think about, really it's our love and gratitude for God, who He is and what He's done, should be the ultimate motivator. Mm-hmm. So, people talk about your 3 a.m. friends where you could be stuck, on the side of the road, or you got to go to the hospital and you need somebody to come over and watch your kids. Like, who would you call at 3 a.m. that would come and do that for you? Well, if you call somebody at 3 a.m. and that's that type of friend, that's that type of relationship, and they're tired, but they gladly come over and do it because they love you, they care about you, they care about your well-being, and it's not a chore because of the relationship with you have. So I think there's also this connection between the depth of our relationship with God also helps us have the correct perspective and motivation when it comes to serving. It's like, wow, Jesus forgave me of my sins and I get to spend eternity in heaven with Him, and He just wants me to help out in this small way right now. It's like, well, of course, but then as you grow over time, maybe it's a little bit bigger and it's a little bit bigger, but it's kind of the same thing, when people talk about giving, and, we teach the tithe, which is 10% to the local church. And it's a lot easier if you start tithing when you're making $100, right? And then if you've tithed on 100, you can graduate to 1,000, and then you can graduate to 10,000, and graduate to 100,000, and then for those that make more than that, it's a chunk of change if you've never given, you've never tithed, and you're like, yeah, I make $500,000 a year. Like, that's a lot of money, right? But when you kind of grow incrementally over time, it's just sort of the next natural thing to do. And now, I mean, it's like I look at what I make and what I'm able to give, and I'm like, I wish I could give more, right? Because it's out of love and gratitude that I give, not because like, oh, I have to. And I think serving can be the same way, that there's this connection between the actual relationship that we have with Jesus and our serving.
Well, I think it ties to, like, before we started recording, we were talking about some things going on either in our lives or in the life of the church body. And we had some time of prayer about those things. And I was thinking, one of the great things about you bringing that up, that there's just a lot of stuff going on that we need to pray about, is in any one of those circumstances, if you don't have the perspective or the knowledge of there's a lot going on, that I'm just dealing with my one thing. So all I see is this one isolated moment is happening in my life. I don't know that it necessarily needs prayer or not prayer. It's just happening. And if you tie a bunch of other experiences together, you start to go, oh, maybe I'm part of a larger thing that's going on. So as that ties to serving, it would be easy to say, I'm just sitting here writing name tags, or I'm just mixing up another can of frozen orange juice, or whatever the thing. We don't do frozen orange juice.
It's not frozen anymore.
It's not frozen anymore.
No.
It's thawed orange juice.
Yes.
That I'm kind of doing a task, and in a way I'm filling a need. I'm kind of a cog in a machine, but I'm not seeing what God is doing in me, and I'm not seeing what God is doing in the lives of the people who are consuming the beverages or are able to know the names. Like, it just seems like something kind of piddly that I've been asked to do. It's busy work, and that's what church serving is just busy work. And without the context or the perspective, no, it's God is doing something much larger in the mass of serving that is happening. He's doing something much larger, either in you, in the church body, in the community, through that.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because again, it's another thing. I don't remember if the message, I think it was like 40 something minutes, right? It could have easily been an hour and a half.
It was north of 40.
So another thing I chose not, when it comes to doing sermons, you're, what am I not going to say, right? Because of the interest of time. But that makes me think of this concept that, I heard this from another church, and it's been called different things by different people, but they call it like the chain of salvation, okay? So you think about people are sitting in the service, and they hear the message, and they hear the gospel, and they choose to respond. And their life and their eternity is forever changed. It's on one hand, it's really easy to be like, oh, well, whoever was preaching that day that shared the gospel, like, well, they're the one that get the credit for that, because they shared the gospel and the person responded. But it's really everyone collectively was a part of this chain, from the moment that somebody drives in, just take, our setup here. We've got some flags up there, right at the street, that say the name of the church. It looks like there's something happening. There's cones that have been put up to help guide people into the driveway and know kind of where to go. And so from the moment they drove in and they see that the flags were put up and the cones were put out, it's like somebody's expecting me to come here today. And they find their parking spot, and they walk in, and they've been greeted by the parking team that maybe waved to them as they're coming in, and then we've got different layers of greeters outside the building and holding the doors open and coming in, and we use name tags here, so that's just kind of one way to level the playing field for everybody. I could walk up and I could say, hey, you, or, hey, man, but I see your name tag and it says Jeremy. So I can just say, hey, Jeremy. And there's something about hearing your name. Everybody loves to hear their name. So a guest gets their name tag, and then other people can greet them. And it's like, hey, good morning, Brian. It's nice to have you. Now, they don't know that maybe that's Brian's very first Sunday ever, and they don't know all the junk that's gone on in Brian's life, for the past however many years leading up to this very moment. But Brian is greeted, and Brian gets to get some coffee or tea, because we know Brian drinks tea, and he drops his kids off, and everybody a part of that. The kids workers aren't just like babysitting, for an hour. They're depending on the age of the kids, it might feel more like that, but that's not what it is. It's the parents now have a distraction-free hour to go into the service, where they're greeted on their way in, they're helped to find a seat, they sit down, they are going to be looking at their program, and as people engage with them, and they hear the host welcoming them, they're even if they don't know the songs and they're not singing, but that's a part of the experience for them. And then they hear a message and they get to respond to the message, and in this case, the person decides, yes, I am a sinner and I have been living in rebellion and I need Jesus and I'm going to submit to him and live for him now. Like, everybody all along actually was a part of the win that day of welcoming, a new member into the family of God. It's not just the person on stage, it's everybody. And I think, if we really have that perspective of like, I'm not just fill in the blank. I'm not just putting out a cone, or just putting some coffee out, or just changing a diaper, or just turning a microphone on or off, or just advancing a slide, or just teaching a lesson in the preschool, or just even cleaning up a mess because somebody spilled that coffee on accident and they're super embarrassed by it now, but somebody swoops in and they're not just cleaning up coffee, but it's all part of the process. And it's the collective win and getting to be a part of what God's doing. It's bigger than we think.
I think that was the one thing that stood out to me probably the most from the sermon was just a lot more is going on when we serve. We just don't see it's God has a different perspective on it, and he's the one who's using all those people together to help accomplish his plan of people coming to know him, which is so cool.
Yeah, you mentioned 3 perspectives of serving as an assignment, not just volunteering. Your gifting is, which we might need to talk a little bit about what that is. Your gifting is for ministering, not just consuming. And serving is about an altar, not a container. And I can't remember now. I think the way my Sunday went, I don't know that I made it into the service much. So I talked to that one class, and then I've been just trying to see what other teams are up to. And I think the first time I heard, so I saw the image because we didn't do a rehearsal, so I hadn't seen, because you were stuck in North Carolina.
That's right.
Wherever you were stuck.
Florida. I was stuck in Florida.
But I had seen the image in the slides of the pitch, like the water going into the thing with holes, and but I didn't know what it meant. And then I think we were in a meeting after where I heard it applied. Like, this is what that image was. So I'm like, oh, that explains so much of my time on staff. So then I got to listen to the sermon later. So I think that particular image was helpful. I'm curious of y'all, out of all those things, what's been most helpful, or which one is like, oh, well, that's a kind of a no-brainer. I don't think about that one. But I think there was, in some of my friends, there was a famous comment that I made at a retreat about, so we have this 5-year training program called the Antioch Project, and the folks who come in that, for the longest time, I don't know that I quite had the perspective of they're probably gonna leave. That's the point of it, is to send them out, much like at Antioch in the New Testament is where Paul and Barnabas were commissioned to go out. And
where the name came from.
It's where the name came from, right? So I'm like, okay, well, we're training up more awesome people for Hope was probably where my brain was. I wasn't thinking of leaving because I'm not planning to leave, so I'm not expecting anyone else to do that either. And what became apparent over time was the moment someone says, I feel like God has called me to pursuing vocational ministry, which meant in my mind, okay, probably what that means is I thought you were going to be here for decades. I got 5 years, maybe. The way Antioch is structured, you might stay. I'll just pick on Luke. You might stay in my area for 2 years, but then we want you to know how a local church operates. So you're going to bounce around to different departments, or you're going to change how you're serving in my department because you need to learn a different set of leadership skills. So I'm like, okay, I got 5 years with you, but the comment was, and you're dead to me. But it's not like
I do remember.
Yes.
I told Brian, I was like, hey, I've decided to do Antioch, and
I'm now dead to you.
Yeah, basically I was like, oh, okay, well that makes sense when you put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, it does change my focus from, what can I do with you long term versus how do I need to get you ready to go somewhere else, right? But in the first time I presented this idea, and I was kind of speaking off the top of my head and probably was being cuter than I was supposed to be, I think there was an honesty of, I feel like on the selfish side of me, I'm supposed to, by the end of either my service of work or by the time I die, I need to show up before the Lord and say, look at all of the people that have been trained up and are doing awesome things in the thing that you've given me to do. And that I can know, I think some of it was just me soothing my ego and look at them all. I can see them all. They're all right here. And I know that when I pass off this earth, that they're still here and hope will continue to move and all that kind of stuff. And they're all gone. They've all gone on to other places. And I walked off the stage, and Randy Lathrop, in a very loving correction, slap in the back of my head, says through the microphone at this thing, yeah, well, be encouraged because those people are helping the ministry has actually expanded because they're not stuck at Hope. God has sent them out, and other people are blessed by that. And it's taken me a long time to realize, which is what that picture was. I don't know that I, until Sunday, had the perspective, all of that work, I have invested in other people, but it has been like a drink offering poured out on God's altar, and it does count for, it's not for nothing. Even if I can't numerically look at and pat myself on the back, we'll see how large this department that I have been given responsibility for. And so that was very helpful in giving perspective on because a lot of, on the vocational side, it does feel like you're like kind of spinning your wheels because people come, people go, like I got to start over. And there can be a level of futility feeling about it if you don't have that perspective.
Yeah, there's this author that I've read quite a bit of his stuff. He reminds me a lot of our founding pastor, but he just has like a totally different body of work that he's done. And he has a lot of like short, punchy, pithy sayings. And one of the things that he says that fits into this, what you're just talking about here, is he says most of life has hidden impact. And it's basically like we will never see truly what the impact of it on this side of eternity. And that, he didn't specifically talk about this altar container thing, but he's getting at the same thing, that we're doing it and we're not necessarily going to see and we're not necessarily going to know, but because what we do is ultimately for God, then it's enough, and that's why we do it. And there are times, it's ministry, at the church staff level, it's not all drudgery and all, like we never get to see anything. Like, but I think when we do get to see, it's why we get really excited, because we don't get to see everything.
Right.
We see parts of it, and you see some really good things. I mean, I remember, when we did last fall, we did that Life God's Way series, and we were going through, just all here's Life God's Way in all these different areas. And I remember hearing stories of people that were like truly taking steps, like they may have not been a follower of Jesus and they become a follower of Jesus, or they're a follower of Jesus but they just don't know, or it's never occurred to them that, maybe this area of my life I need to bring under submission to Jesus, and they go ahead and do that. And like, that was very encouraging, very rewarding. Like, so it's almost like for a short time, some of those holes in that bowl got plugged up, and you could look in and you could see a little bit of water in there, and that's really encouraging. But that fuels you when you get to see it. But I think a lot of it is just, we will never really get to see. And even, you think about all the people that in the last, 47 and a half years that have come to Hope and gotten all kinds of different levels of training, formal, informal, whatever it is, and who are not here today, but they're walking with Jesus and they're serving and they're leading somewhere else. Like, just the multiplication effect of the greater kingdom impact. And I think that's sometimes hard when we're serving, is, we're doing things a certain way because obviously we think this is the best way to do it, right? So I mean, if you don't think something's the best way to do it, then you don't do it that way. So you want to be convinced and convicted of, yes, this is right and good what we're doing, but it doesn't mean it's the only way. It doesn't mean God can't work through other means and other people. But to have the perspective that there's like net kingdom impact, even if it's like not specific Hope Church impact, like we want to have it benefit and impact in a positive way what we're doing, but there's sometimes it's about the greater kingdom impact. And that's the challenge and reward of training up future leaders, to send them out, because it gives more kingdom impact in more places.
How about Luke, you and Jeremy? What of those, like the assignment, not a volunteer, ministering, gifting is for ministry, not all those things. Kind of what was either challenging, or I wrestled this down a long time ago?
It's not really the challenging, but just the idea of it's an assignment. It's not just a volunteering. I think really spoke to me, especially thinking back, before I was on staff, when I was volunteering in different roles. And a lot of times it did feel like it becomes just kind of like drudgery. But taking that viewpoint of, this is an assignment, and in some way, shape, or form, God has put me here in this serving position. This is my assignment. To me, gives it a different mentality, and I kind of wish I'd seen it that way years ago. Not to say I was shirking responsibility or anything like that, but the mentality is just different with it being an assignment. And that may be because I'm a guy, I can relate it to like military or something like that. Like if you're assigned to do something, it has a completely different weight and a completely different feel than, I just chose to do this and I can choose not to do this Sunday, or I can.
Like there's weight to the assignment, but volunteering is just
Yeah, it's kind of like I chose this and I can choose not to choose this, but assignment is.
Yeah. There's probably accountability attached to an assignment somewhere.
Yeah, so I really appreciated that.
Yeah.
I think the perspective of I've wrestled with for a number of years has been that your gifting is for ministering, not just consuming. I think when I look back of when I started serving earlier, it was, I was grateful to be able to do it and to serve, but I got really fixated on how well was I doing in my assignment. Like it became very self-focused of like, oh, am I doing the best that I can do so that I look good in front of other people, or so I feel fulfilled. And so I think just in some ways, I think our hearts, sometimes the motivation can get really focused on what am I getting out of it? Like, yes, it's a sacrifice, but am I getting out what I want?
Mm-hmm.
And I think what God has helped me over time in this area has been, really in the end, how can I do this in such a way that really blesses other people? Even if I don't look the best, like, are other people being helped through this? And that's actually been really helpful. Like when I've had that change in mentality of less of how well am I doing performing in this assignment? It's more about, okay, are actually people, are they getting benefited through this? And letting that be more of a better measure of success than about how well I feel like I'm doing. And then also that helped me be more teachable to my leaders as well. Of it's less focused on how well am I getting out what I wanted to, rather, okay, what are we wanting to have happen in the lives of the people who are receiving this? Mm-hmm. And when that becomes more of the focus, that's freed. It's given me a little more freedom of, okay, yeah, I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to do what's needed to help them. And I think also, though, it comes back to that ultimate focus of this is really a service to the Lord. And I may not feel like I did my best. I may have tried my best, but I'm like, I just didn't go as well as I hoped. Or maybe I did it in a way that I think we did it really well, but the people didn't really quite get, that the people are leaky, I think is what you mentioned. Mm-hmm. And I really served hard. I gave it my all, but they just didn't quite get what we were hoping to get from it. Reminding myself that, in the end, this is really for the Lord. And so if the results aren't exactly what I wanted, I can be encouraged that in the end, this is really service to God. And that gives meaning to all of it. I want to do my best. I want to bless others. But the ultimate goal is I really want to honor the Lord through this, not about, hey, how do I feel like I did, or am I being fulfilled? When I make it really the Lord and then others and then me, when I put it in that priority, like putting it focused on building God's kingdom, building up other people and then me, that really can help free me up in a lot of ways to enjoy it and put less pressure on myself as well.
That is a lovely segue to the why we serve, because there's things that God is doing. Again, it's not just busy work. There's things that God has purpose in what we're doing, and Matt, you listed several things that God does, and Luke, you touched on two of them, which is that God blesses others when I serve, even if I'm not doing what I want to do. There's probably benefit that others are getting, but then God blesses me when I serve. So I think there is the right-heartedness of I'm doing this for God. I'm doing whatever I'm doing to bless others, but there is the benefit to you too, to me too. So I guess there's some of that, because you also said God gifted me to serve. So how does the gifting and the benefit to me, Matt, how do those things potentially go together? I know we don't always serve directly in gifting. I'll tell you a story. This is fun. So years ago, I led a mission team to Seville, Spain. It's my only time to Spain. It was fun. But we were helping out two college graduates, ladies, who were helping college students there in Seville to, gather around them and lead them to Jesus. That was kind of the whole goal. And there's a ministry partner that we have as a church who was not in Spain, but in Germany at the time, but also leading a branch of this in Seville. And I was marveled at, you have almost no oversight, the two of you, and you're in Spain, and it's a beautiful city, and who knows what you do during the week, but you're doing this, and you're faithful with the assignment, even though there's not a lot of oversight. And that's really commendable. I would be spending much more time at cafes, but
especially when they take a siesta in the afternoon.
Right. And so that was really encouraging. Like, oh, you're really taking this seriously, which is great. But then they were commenting on, like, there were 4 of us from the United States, and then I think they had a couple of others from our program, and then there were a couple of other Americans there who were just there because they like Seville, and like, I think they'd come with their church and helped them at some other point. And there were comments from the missionaries there, like how much we were able to get done because there were more hands. And if it was a regular week, it's just 2 ex-college students and they're having to do all of it. And I realized in that moment, they don't really get to have the luxury of like, am I gifted in this or am I not gifted in this? The thing needs to get done. So it doesn't matter. I've got to get it done. And so there's that. And the more hands you have, now we can start to think, well, am I doing what's best given how God has gifted me, or is somebody else better gifted to do that, and all that kind of stuff. But I think even for them who might not be the most administrative, or they may not be the most evangelical, like they're not gifted in evangelism, or they may not be gifted in mercy, or all of those things that, Paul has listed, but I got to do all of it. There's still benefit even when I'm working outside of my gifting, but then God has gifted. And so I guess can you speak a little bit to the correlation between the serving because God uses that and then the gifting that God uses too?
Yeah. I don't know. I think you bring up just comment. You bring up an interesting, nuance. Is it different in a missions context? I think thinking about the local church.
Yeah.
Okay. Again, the thing that's mind blowing is God doesn't need us at all, but He chooses to include us, and then to include us, He gives us different gifts and abilities. And yes, there are spiritual gifts, and I sort of broadened the category of gifting to just, looking at things much even broader. The fact that we're alive is a gift, and we have time. And, there's things that are not necessarily spiritual gifts, but, you could, I don't think music is like anywhere on any of the official spiritual gifts, but I think there's people that have do they have a greater propensity to music? Do they have gifting in it? You look at like people, like Mozart and some of the famous composers and stuff, and you're like, well, okay, those dudes had some gifting, right? They're not just sitting there plunking out some stuff. So, and even like, your daughter, that song that she wrote for the piano competition, I mean, she's 16 years old. That was amazing, so God gives us these gifts and these abilities it's not wrong that we benefit from them, but like, I'm not going to call anybody out. And there's lots of examples. I have one specific one in my mind right now of, you see people who say God has gifted musically, and there's all the jokes about Satan was part of the choir, and and there's all those things. But I'm thinking of one person particularly who, from all indications, is not walking with Jesus in any way, shape, or form right now. Is like considered in like the superstar type status. They, like a lot of people, got their start in the church and music, and wrote songs about God and Jesus and, worship things. And if they were singing other people's songs, they're like, wow, that person has gifting, right? And it's not wrong to make a living off of being a professional musician or singer, but to go from starting here and being gifted by God to now basically turning your back on God and the church and, making bukus of money, that's just using your gifts to consume and provide the income to consume whatever you want to consume in your life. I'm using an extreme category or example here, but so I think in the context of the local church, I mean, there's so much that we need to do to accomplish the mission God has given us. Every church's mission should be based off of the Great Commission, but every church is unique. And I think another thing with the gifting is not only does God gift the people in the church, but God gifts the church with certain people. Like an example of this. We had him on several episodes ago, but Pastor Jerry, he has been a gift to Hope Church for over 26 years on staff, but he was a part of the church much longer than that. Like Jerry, it has so many unique gifts and abilities, and he retired, and then God led him to move to Houston. So he's not a part of our church anymore, and so that was a gift that we don't have anymore. Now, does that mean God's not going to bring other people along and be able to do things? No, but God gives the church the gift of people, and he gifts people in certain ways, and he expects us to come together and to use those for the greater good of others and the mission that he's wanting us to accomplish.
So you're saying we're all God's gift to the church?
In a way, yeah, in a way. And when you sit there and don't do anything, God's going to work through someone else. But when you don't participate, then you miss out.
Yeah.
And I think the thing, it's funny, you a little different angle. You brought up the missions example, but I think, the thing of God blessing me when I serve, there's a thing out there in the Christian world of, what do they call it, like mission tourism, where people go like, we're going to take a mission trip to Tahiti, or something that, like, there are all these places that everybody would want to go as a tourist, but let's figure out a way to, call it missions and do something in the name of Jesus, but really we're here to play and see stuff. And my opinion is I'm not so much for that. That's not our approach to missions here. But I've been all over the world. I've been different places with you, and Luke and I haven't been anywhere yet. But he's newer to the staff. I've been all kinds of places that I would not have had any other reason to go to, other than the fact that, like, there was, like, ministry to do there. We were encouraging our partners or bringing teams to help support what our partners were doing. And so I've gotten to travel all over the world and see all kinds of things that, I wouldn't have seen that if I hadn't have been doing ministry in that way. And you're like, well, where do my gifts come in? Well, I have some gifts of administration, and a lot of my roles is in previous season, I was the pastor over missions. So I'm organizing these teams, and I'm setting the table so that we can support our partners and people can do these things. So that's where I got to, have the connection between my gifting and what we were doing. Then at different seasons, I've gone and done and spoke for some of our missions partners. Well, I think a gifting I have is also in teaching. So I've gotten to use that, in that way. So as we serve, we don't serve so that we can say, oh, I went there, did that, check it off, like your big map that you stamp, went there. But as we're actually serving God with our gifts, he will lead us to places that we could never imagine. He will have us interact with all kinds of people who we wouldn't maybe meet otherwise. And those are some of the tangible and the intangible blessings that come. They're helped. We're blessed. Our faith is strengthened and encouraged. And I remember the first time that I went to Europe to work with Connection. This was before we sent teams. It was more of like a.
And that's who the Spain thing was.
Right. That was through Connection Ministry. In fact, we had a handful of the leaders here at Hope on Sunday because they're in town for a conference that's happening actually right now. And so this conference was in Berlin, and it was a gathering of several of the campuses around Europe of Connection, several of their graduates that they had, gone to the university in whatever city where Connection was, and then they've moved and they're working in places, but still having a missional mindset, serving in the local church now as a post-college student. So they all kind of come together, and people talk about how at least in America, you listen to the media, you listen to kind of mainstream church stuff. Yeah, the gospel's dead in Europe. It's all post-Christian, and I was there gathered with 100 believers in Berlin from all over Europe, and it was like the gospel's not dead here. It is alive and well, and these people are. The average person in this room is paying a greater price than I am as a pastor in America. When you think about just what it meant in this atheistic culture for them to decide to follow Jesus and the relationship impact that it had with their family, what it cost them. And they're here, and it was incredibly encouraging. Like Jessica and I were speaking at that conference. They asked us to talk about a couple of different topics, and but it was, so I was going to serve, getting to experience this, and I was tremendously blessed by being there and encouraged by being there, and that's just how God works, and it doesn't have to that only happens when you go overseas. No, that happens when you serve on a Sunday, and you get to see a lot of it feels like you're pouring into that leaky bucket, but you're blessed by, everybody who served on, let's just take Easter. We prayed, God answered our prayer. He had allowed us to double, so we had twice as many people come. They got to hear the gospel, had all kinds of conversations with people that were having a great time, and they have a good experience. Everybody who served was a part of that.
Yep.
So that's just where the way God works is we serve. He uses how he's put us together to help meet the needs of other people, and that's just how he works. So they're helped. I'm helped. I got to actually, in some ways, sometimes I don't know if you guys have ever had this experience where you do something and you're like, wow, this is what God made me for. And you just have this incredible sense of, fulfillment of I was really living my purpose these last 5 minutes or this last day, or usually it's short, and the rest of the time in between is mundane. But there are times when we step out on the ledge, right? And it's I don't know how this is going to happen, but I'm going to give it all, and this is what you've called me to do. This is the assignment you've given me. And then God comes through, and it's just an amazing experience.
Do y'all have thoughts? You don't have to have thoughts. You may not have had thoughts.
I think
I had a thought, and then my 51-year-old brain said, that we'll just pack that one up and store it away, and we'll forget about it.
I think one of the ways that I've seen God bless people who are serving is there's another level of just, I guess, fellowship or community that happens when you're serving with other people. I can think of people that I knew, I was acquainted with, but then once I joined a serving team with them, we actually became really good friends. And so I think that's one of the ways I've seen God bless people is as they serve alongside others. I think, you can really have a deeper sense of community. And so I think, sometimes it's the reality of hey, we're staying up late cranking this project out because it has to be done by this deadline. There's community that happens from that. But then there's also a community sense of when you watch other people sacrifice. I think that really that's a level of encouragement that happens. I think when you see I can do that too because God's sustaining that person as they're sacrificing. So part of it is I think God blesses us by seeing his faithfulness in our lives, but also in other people's lives as they sacrifice, of like, oh, that was really good how God came through to provide. And so I think, there's one of the blessings is just a deeper, I think for myself, a deeper reliance on the Lord, and also a deeper reliance on people that he's given in community, that, okay, we can do this with God's help. On our own, we're not going to be able to pull this off, but I've seen God come through enough times that there's a new level of confidence that I think I have that I would not have had if I hadn't have taken those next steps to serve and sacrifice.
Yeah. You asked if anything like came to mind or anything, and I don't know if this is the direction you're hoping to go at the end of this at all. But when Matt said, sometimes there's a moment where you're doing something and like everything clicks in and you're like, this is what I was here for, or this is. So the moment that came to mind for me was a couple years ago. We had been cleaning out the youth room, and there was an old pool table, billiard table, a cheap, wood. And so the youth, probably 6 or 8 of them, because it was heavy, threw it in the dumpster. But it was way too big to come back out of the dumpster. So now it's going to clog up everything. It's not, the trash man's not going to be able to dump. It's going to create actually a big problem because they just threw the whole thing in there. So the next day, I climbed in the dumpster with the battery circle saw to cut up this pool table inside the dumpster. And I had that moment of, this is what I was made for, right here in the dumpster with a circle saw. So that's what immediately came to mind when you said, hey, sometimes there's that moment where you just know this is my gifting. Right?
And you're serving with the assignment as the guy in charge of the facilities. So you're right in the zone.
That was it. That was my moment.
I love it.
Well, one of the things I mentioned to the group on Sunday that I was talking to, I remember when I first moved to town, I had friends at a different church in town that was much larger in facilities and congregation than Hope is at the moment. It's massive and much larger than any church I'd ever been a part of prior to that. But then because of who I knew already, they said, hey, you should join the choir. And I joined the choir, and the church shrank overnight. And I knew people and they knew me, and I had relationships with people. And so what I had encouraged that group on Sunday morning was, if Hope seems like a large place, or you feel like there's just so many people here on a Sunday morning, if you get involved serving, a blessing to you is that the church shrinks and you start to know people and you can start having friendships. And I think an outcropping of that is as I have been faithful in serving and I have gotten to know people and have gotten involved, then when things kick up, like I'm having a problem with a kid or something breaks at the house. I think there's right now, it is probably a spark plug problem on my daughter's car is goofing up, and it's causing engine lights to come on and to feel a little, is this car going to break as I drive it? And there's a guy at our church who I have never seen him this animated about anything. It's fantastic. Like, I love fixing cars, and he's been thinking about my kid's car on how we can best fix it. And on Saturday, we're driving it to their house, and we're going to spend some time working on the car. And I think this is obviously a place that he is experienced in and gifted in a way. But I would be taking it to some faceless mechanic shop, except that I have a relationship with this guy and he has a relationship with our family. And that has come a lot through serving and that investment of time and sweat and whatnot with him. There's a care for my child, there's care for my kid's car, and we get to utilize some of his ability. But that comes through, that's a benefit to me through serving. We've talked any number of times about the Life God's Way. When I experience calamity or when I experience trouble in life, if I haven't invested in people prior to that, then that calamity hits a whole lot harder than if I have a circle of relationships that can kind of help in weathering that through. So that's another benefit that you don't immediately think of, like, I'm going to show up at church on Sunday and serve, that I'm thinking, well, in 5 years when the roof falls in, that there's going to be people who can kind of help me with that.
And that's the really sad thing, is that I think when there are things that happen and it's like, I don't have anybody to call.
Mm-hmm. I don't have a 3 a.m. friend.
I don't know anybody that could help me right now,
mm-hmm.
because I just don't know anyone, but B, I don't know anybody that could help me. And I think that's part of the reciprocity in the kingdom. I mean, last night, I was up here late. A friend and Jeremy popped in and out, saw us out there. It just happened to be that a friend and we both had the same problem with our car, and both of our cars died in the parking lot here. Spent a couple nights out in the parking lot, and last night was the night that worked. That
not sleeping out in the parking lot.
Okay, the cars were camping,
not people.
Yeah.
So if you happen to drive by in the last couple of days at 3 a.m. and see my car out there, and you're like, is Matt still working? No, it was
burning the midnight oil.
It was there without me, but together, it was about, I think it was around 6 o'clock when we started on the first car, and it was about 9:30 when we finished up with the second one, and we got them both
mm-hmm.
going, and they both drove home that night. So, but it's like, I have relationships, and I have somebody that knows how to do that, and I know somebody, and so that was a tremendous blessing. I think part of what you were getting at too a minute ago, which I'm glad you went there before we wrapped up, was the church size is really relevant,
mm-hmm. relative
to your own experience, right? So some people would come to Hope at the size that we're at. And they'd be like, man, this is a small church. Like, wow, this is a small church. And other people would come and they'd be like, this is a huge church, and like, we're not a mega church or anything, but to them it feels like it. And we're also not, a 35 person country church mm-hmm. either. And there's churches are fulfilling, if they're Bible believing, on mission churches. That's why there's all kinds of churches in all different places with all different sizes of groups of people, because of what God's called them to do. But so however, whatever, if Hope feels big to you or small, if you're one of our regulars, the church has to get smaller for you to have relationships and grow. And the only way it gets smaller is you connect with groups of people. Mm-hmm. That's why we talk about serving on teams together. As you were saying, we tried the best. Different teams work differently, but we try to have a component of, the teams pull together and they have a task to do, but it's also a chance to share prayer requests and what's going on in your life. And it's also why we have groups. You have a group of people that you can get to know, and the church becomes smaller. And what you were touching on, Luke, a few minutes ago is really, community is formed in the context of some kind of mission, and community grows mm-hmm. and deepens in the context of mission. So how do we know that? Well, as we were talking about, I was stuck at the airport. I was stuck at the airport for a little while before I left with all kinds of other people. There was no community there because there was no mission. We each had our own individual mission, was to try to get where we were going. Mm-hmm. But there was no sense of a collective mission of anything we were trying to do together. So there's no sense of community when you're sitting in the airport in the waiting area. But it's as you partner together with other Christ followers, and even if you're exploring faith in church and who Jesus is, there are things you can do that allow you to experience that community, and you see God's people in action. We have teams that are open for anybody to be a part of. Then we have some teams that, well, no, these are for teams of people that have committed to already follow Jesus. So just that aspect of that, you don't just put a group of people together and there automatically be community. There's got to be this sense of mission, and that's ultimately together we're trying to invite people to discover and experience God's ways. That's our mission as a church. And then all of the teams and the groups and the smaller sub communities within, they're all supporting that mission of inviting people to discover and experience God's ways. And some of those teams and groups are the avenues and vehicles to discover and experience God's ways. So I think that's really important. Of you can't do, whether the church has 100 or 500 or 1,000 or 5,000 or 10,000. I mean, there's really no way to have deep, meaningful relationships even with 100 people. You've got to get into those smaller groups and smaller teams, and then you have a chance to serve and help one another. In fact, and I think one of the things, Jeremy fields a lot of requests that we get, for help and assistance, and we partner with some different organizations who really are set up for that. So we don't, somebody calls in and they have certain needs, we can refer them to one of our partners, but we're just not set up for that. But it's within the context of the groups and the teams that people have supported and helped. If someone was sick or they had a baby, they provide some meals, or there's been people have needed help in other ways, and it's the group of people that they're in relationship with, that they're serving together and they're serving one another. It's like, hey, here's a need that we can come together and meet, and then that person has a need that's met, their life is blessed, the rest of the people that are a part of serving and maybe meeting that need, they're blessed too. So I guess the thing is, serving it's not just a thing we have to do. It's not just a thing we do with the leftovers, but it's actually, we're called to be servants because we're called to be Christ-like. And I kind of mentioned this in the message, but I guess maybe I'll end here because we're like, I don't know what, 6 hours in. But if the Christ follower is a disciple. There's no difference between a follower of Jesus and a disciple. A disciple is a Christ follower. A Christ follower is a disciple. And a disciple is to become more and more like Jesus. Mm-hmm. So what did Jesus do? Jesus served. Jesus gave of himself. Jesus, so to the extent that we don't do the things that Jesus did, now obviously we can't do everything that he did, and praise God, we don't have to die on a cross. He did that for us. But if we're in the process of becoming more and more like Jesus, but yet we're not doing the things that Jesus did that we can do that will help us grow, then we're actually missing out, and we're becoming less of a disciple than we could be if we were to add these other things in. It's not just an intellectual exercise. Well, I'm just going to sit by myself and read the Bible. Well, there's a lot of the Bible, especially the New Testament, you can't even do it and practice it and live it in isolation.
Yeah.
Like, to do all of the one another's, you need at least another person. Like, it takes people around you. And yes, it's good to practice those in your family, with your spouse and with your kids or with your roommates. But there's a point where y'all, like your family, y'all kind of figure out how to work together, and maybe you wear each other kind of smooth in some ways, and you've got some ruts that you travel. Well, then you start bumping into and connecting with other Christ followers. Well, then now you start like having some rough edges be worn off that wouldn't have gotten it with the people that you're so comfortable with. So we need one another, and it's actually as we serve, just like Jesus served, that's part of the process that he uses to have us become more and more like him.
I'm going to leave it there because it is 6 hours in that we've been recording. If you've made it this far in the podcast, give yourself a high five. But also, if you're serving, I hope this has been an encouragement and a reframing and a refueling of what you're doing for the Lord by serving at Hope. If you're not currently serving either at Hope or at the church that you're attending, hopefully this was an encouragement to, plug in and start.
Just do it.
Just do it. Start with a Sunday and then kind of build from there. But there's more going on in the serving than it looks like from just the surface of things. But either way, if you are in town in Fort Worth, come by and see us on Sunday. We'd love to worship with you this week, and we'll be back probably next week for another Sunday Extra podcast.